Welcome to Around the SEC, where we take a trip around the greatest conference in the nation, following the biggest storylines and making bold predictions. I'm your host, Mikayla Kelly.
And I'm Micah Farmer. Well, folks, the SEC Championship has officially been set. We'll discuss that as well as Auburn's statement win, some coach firings, and even jump ahead to previewing Rivalry Weekend. All that and more today on Around the SEC.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Around the SEC. We've got a jam-packed show for you guys, recapping this past weekend and previewing the next 2 weekends because, unfortunately, we'll be out of town for Thanksgiving break, but we of course still wanted to chat about Rivalry Weekend.
For sure.
So let's get right into it. And we start with the SEC Championship. For the fourth time in history of the SEC Championship, Alabama and Georgia will face off for the conference crown. Now I'm seeing a lot of parallels between this year and 2021. If you recall, just 2 years ago, the Bulldogs rolled into Atlanta undefeated, while the Tide was a one-loss team. But Alabama pulled off the upset 41-24, and both teams went on to not only make the playoffs, but made the college football championship, where, of course, Georgia won their first title since the 80s. What's your thoughts on this matchup, and how critical could this game end up being for both teams, assuming they win out?
Well, this game is going to be very critical for Georgia because obviously it's a win and they're in, but I think if Georgia loses this game, they might even find themselves outside of the playoffs. For Alabama, I think they honestly struggle to get in either way because of the head-to-head loss to Texas, who if they win out will be another conference champion with the same exact record. So I think this game, while Alabama would love to win the SEC, for the playoff hopes, it's even more crucial for Georgia to win this one, who is winless versus Alabama in the SEC championship games all time.
I think this is absolutely critical for Georgia. We see how competitive it is this season, and it's going to be a struggle for the committee to pick their top four. Obviously, there's a lot of games that have to be played and a lot of rematches of top 6 teams that still need to play each other. I do think Alabama, it could potentially be a must-win depending on how the other games play out. If chaos starts to erupt around them, Alabama could have a chance to get in. With that one loss to Texas?
I think they would need a Florida State loss to Louisville and a Texas loss to whoever they end up playing to get in.
100%, but let's not forget, Tennessee and Auburn are playing spoiler
That's true.
In these next 2 weeks. And if Auburn comes in and beats Alabama in 2 weeks from now, I think Alabama's knocked out completely, and then they really don't have anything to play for.
A second loss to an
in the
unranked
SEC
Auburn,
Championship,
no
except for bragging rights, but it'll be interesting to see this face-off again because this is scarily similar to the game that happened 2 years ago. And no, I'm not wearing houndstooth on purpose in favor of Alabama. It was just a coincidence.
These things happen, you know. The Auburn Tigers had arguably their best performance of the season this past week as they traveled up to Fayetteville and demolished the Arkansas Razorbacks 48-10. Jack linebacker Jalen McLeod, corner DJ James, and return man Keontae Scott all received awards this past week for their performances. What impressed you the most about this Auburn team in the big win?
I think what impressed me the most is how balanced we looked on both sides of the ball and how great we looked on special teams. I think we look like a full, complete team ready to play a team like Bama in 2 weeks. I think that gave them the confidence they needed. Not that Arkansas has been anything special this season, but they were coming off their best performance of the season in Florida. They had just won that game last week. But Auburn came into their house and they got going quick. And I think that's what they need to do going forward into these next 2 games. Come out quick. They had 14 points in the first 2 series of the game. I was sitting there watching that game and said, what happened to Auburn?
Where's this team been all season?
Them. And clearly Peyton Thorne has improved immensely, and I think that comes from him being named the sole starting quarterback. I think that's what made the difference for this team. I think Hugh Freeze finally put his foot down and realized that would be what was best for this team. Jarquez Hunter continued his hot stretch with another 100-yard-plus rushing game, and they eliminated Arkansas from the postseason.
Yeah.
To touch on them for a little bit, Arkansas is eliminated from playoff contention And I think Sam Pittman could be in trouble potentially come the end of the season. We saw a few coach firings, which we'll get into, but I think he could be in trouble.
Yeah, this has been a huge letdown season for Arkansas. We both had them as a potential sleeper at the start of the year for the SEC.
Why do I say that every
I don't
year?
know, but
they just get worse and worse.
They have not looked great, but I think they're still better than their record indicates, with less than 7-point losses to Ole Miss, LSU, and Alabama all on the road. So brutal schedule for them, but as you say, the record is ultimately what matters, and because of that, Sam Pittman might be in trouble. But to circle back to Auburn for a second, I was really impressed with the defense. I know you talked a lot about the offense and how they did, but this defense forced a lot of 3-and-outs in this game, forced 7 3-and-outs for the Arkansas offense, which is almost unheard of this year for Auburn in SEC play. So shout out to the defense. Jalen McLeod deserved all the awards he got this week.
Sure.
He was insane.
Our linebackers we have on this team are absolutely ridiculous. The safety pairing of Zion Puckett and Caleb Wooden, who took advantage of the lazy ball carrying on Saturday, forcing a turnover in the red zone. This defense has been carrying this team, I think, this whole season, and I think they fly under the radar, but this is a really good defense.
They're ranked top 10 nationally. I think it's going under the radar, but this is a top 10 defense that Auburn has right now.
It's absolutely impressive, and I'd just like to say that I also think KJ Jefferson has no protection. I think it's unfortunate that he's playing with a team like that, because I was went back and rewatched some clips. He's got no protection on him, and I think that's the ultimate downfall that's been for their offense this season. And just to wrap up talking about Auburn, Auburn's not finished with this season with more than 6 wins since 2019. They just got their 6th win, got their bowl game, and with 2 games left to play, including one against New Mexico State, the Tigers appear to be headed for their best season since 2019.
Yes.
Which is crazy to say. Now, I want to talk about a special young man, and that's Jayden Daniels. I've teetered back and forth on how worthy he is of a Heisman nomination. Not only is he worthy of a nomination, I think he deserves to win the whole dang thing. In LSU's 52-35 win over Florida this past weekend, he became the first player in FBS history to throw for 350 yards and rush for 200 yards in the same game. I think he's the best quarterback in college football right now, but probably won't win because his resume is currently stained with 3 losses. What's your thoughts on his Heisman chances? And is the Heisman still winnable with a couple losses in this era of football?
All we need to look at is last year when Caleb Williams won the Heisman on a 3-loss USC team. Lamar Jackson, his Heisman year, that was a 9-4 Louisville team. So if those players won the Heisman, I think Jayden Daniels deserves it as well. He has been light years ahead as far as QB play of anyone else in the conference this year, and is right up there, if not better, and I think he is better than either Michael Penix or Bo Nix this season in terms of performance. This LSU defense is brutally bad, and Daniels can't play defense, so I don't think we can blame him for that. The Tigers had 701 yards of offense versus Florida, the most Florida has ever allowed in a game in school history, and Daniels accounted for 86% of those yards. So just an out-of-this-world performance for Daniels once again. Send him to New York, give him the Heisman. I think he deserves it.
Like you said, he can't play defense. It's not up to him. I think they've lost every game because of the defense.
Yes.
He puts up big numbers every week, plays near flawless every week. There's nothing more the kid could do.
They put up 49 against Ole Miss, and they still lost. What do you want him to do?
Exactly. And like you said, Tim Tebow, RG3, and Lamar Jackson all won with 3 losses. So it definitely is doable. Right now, he sits at 3rd in the Heisman odds, plus 400 between Oregon's Bo Nix and Washington's Michael Penix Jr. Do you think that's because LSU has less of an impressive record?
I think it is, but I think weirdly what could really help Jayden Daniels out this season is Oregon State, because Oregon State gets Washington this week and Oregon next week.
That could be a big upset.
If
Washington
Oregon State can slow down those quarterbacks in those 2 games, and then there's a sloppy Pac-12 title game, I think that's Daniels' path to the Heisman right now.
And I just like to point out that Daniels is 3rd in the country in passing yards behind Penix and Caleb Williams, but top in yards per attempt, passing touchdowns, and pass efficiency rating. Not only that, he is #1 rushing quarterback in the country right now.
He's just the best dual threat in the country. There's no...
Statistically, he's the best, and I don't see why he shouldn't be winning. Because LSU currently sits first in the country in total offense. Put a killer defense with that team, they would be cruising through every team in the country right now.
If you look at the offensive numbers, they are about the same, if not better, than the 2019 LSU team that steamrolled everyone on the way to a national title. It's just this defense cannot keep up this year.
Well, there's still a few tough tests in the Pac-12 left this month, so we'll see if that affects anything else, and we'll see if he gets an invite or potentially wins, representing another SEC player as a Heisman winner.
Yep. The coaching carousel has kicked off early in the SEC this season, as it was announced earlier this week that both Texas A&M head coach Jimbo Fisher and Mississippi State head coach Zach Arnett were both fired from their respective positions. The firing of Fisher by A&M was particularly big news, largely in part due to the $76 million buyout associated with the move. Do you think this was the right move for both of these teams going into next season, or do you think they might have jumped the gun on this a little bit?
I just want to say something first. I want to be a fired SEC coach when I grow up because
I know.
I would love to be sitting with $75 million and never have to work again. But unfortunately, that's probably not how it'll play out for me. But that's 3 times more than any college has ever paid to fire its football coach.
Yes.
With Gus Malzahn from getting fired from Auburn, sitting in second place, but not even close to that number. But I think it's understandable. There is a lot of money that goes into Texas A&M, so they have the money to do it. I also think that teams need to stop paying coaches this much.
Yeah,
give it
it's a bad
time.
decision.
You never know how it's going to play out. Just because you're signing these high recruits doesn't necessarily mean your program's a national championship winning team. So stop spending so much money on these coaches. It almost never works out. But I could see why, because they were stagnant over his final 3 seasons. They came in expecting him to give them a national championship.
They gave him a blank plaque, insert year here for national title.
That was a jinx. That was a jinx in itself. But after signing top recruiting class after top recruiting class, we see it every year, but it never seems to show when they get to the regular season.
Well, it's player development for them. You saw players like Anais Smith and Haynes King come as these super highly rated prospects, and Anais Smith played amazing in his freshman year, and it felt like he's gone backwards over his course at A&M, and he's not the only player that's been like that. Player development is not where it needs to be for the Aggies right now. Then a player like Haynes King transfers to Georgia Tech and is now lighting it up, so something is wrong with that coaching staff. I understand why they made the move.
You have to put development on the coaching. I think it's interesting that they did it when they did, coming off such a beatdown of Mississippi State.
You rarely see a game where both coaches get fired after the game.
Exactly. Very interesting. And if you saw, they presented a $100 million check at halftime.
Yes.
I guess that's what they're using to pay him off. But
congratulations, you're fired.
I do think they wanted to get it done sooner than later, because now is kind of the time where coaches are going to start to be fired from programs, and you want to be the first to jump on them. And another thing, positive for Auburn, I think this was the best thing that could have happened. They need to immediately go start poaching these players, and I think they have a shot to flip a guy like Cam Coleman, who just took Texas A&M out of his bio, a Phoenix City, Alabama native, and I think that's a guy Auburn really has a strong chance to get.
Imagine him with Perry Thompson in that receiving core. That is something you want if you're an Auburn Tiger
Potentially the
fan.
best wide receiving core Auburn's ever had. And that's props to Hugh Freeze recruiting, and I really think that we do have a chance to go get this guy. And then jumping over to Mississippi State, I think Zach Arnett was always a temporary placeholder. In my mind, he was the defensive coordinator, stepped in as interim head coach when Mike Leach had sadly passed away last season. Mississippi State was kind of in this athletic director transition. I think he was just kind of there. Just a weird limbo, kind of both an interim and a full-time hire at the same time, but you're just waiting for the next guy. I think he's a great defensive mind, would be a valued defensive coordinator elsewhere or at Mississippi State still, but
Florida might need to hire him with how bad they've been.
Exactly, or even a head coach at a smaller school, but I don't think we ever saw him as the future of Mississippi State. I think it was just kind of a weird transitional year, but they're having one of their worst seasons in a while, and I think that beat down from the Aggies is what really sealed it for them, and so it'll be interesting to see where they end up. Do you have any prospects you think could potentially land at either of these schools? One thing I've seen thrown around that I think would be interesting, I don't know that it'll happen, but a lot of people are saying that maybe Mississippi State is going to go try and reacquire Dan Mullen, which would be interesting. I don't know that I love that move, but he did have success there before.
And then A&M has released their short list of coaches to include Dan Lanning, who says he's not going anywhere. Lane Kiffin, who always likes to flirt with these opening hires over the offseason, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of social media content about that one. But I don't know who they pick up. If I were them, I would try to get Lance Leipold from Kansas, bring him in. He's been great for the Jayhawks. So bringing a guy that has shown he can develop lower-level talent, and with the recruiting classes that they have, I think that would be a slam dunk hire for the Aggies.
Like you said, I think Dan Lanning, that would be the dumbest move for him to leave Oregon right now. He's probably one of the best coaches in college football. Go stay there, build your legacy.
He said he's not leaving too, so I doubt that happens.
I've heard some talks of when Saban leaves eventually, that job could be potentially wide open for him down the line, which would not be good for us Auburn fans. But
I wouldn't want to be a guy that follows Saban at Alabama, though.
But this Texas A&M job, I think, is a very prime job that coaches should really be wanting. There's a ton of money that's put into that program every year. And someone like Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss just doesn't have the NIL that other schools do, and I think that continues to be the roadblock year after year. I don't necessarily think it's the coaching. I don't think he leaves Ole Miss to go to Texas A&M, but it'll be interesting to see who they get.
For sure.
Before we head to break, of course we have to pick our SEC Teams of the Week. And my SEC Team of the Week has to go, finally, I'm not picking against them, I'm picking them, finally, and that is, of course, the Auburn Tigers. This game sealed the Tigers a bowl game just 1 year under Coach Freeze. And it was not just that they won, it was how they won. Arkansas was coming off their best offensive performance of the season, and that Tiger defense held them to 255 yards. Not to mention that the Auburn Orange and Blue came out guns blazing, leading 14-0 after 2 series. This has the potential to be the turning point for the program going forward. And this team will come in hot against Alabama in 2 weeks. Micah, who's your team of the week?
Well, my team of the week is a team that I've loved all season. It is the Missouri Tigers, who absolutely destroyed Tennessee in a game that we both thought would be close. Missouri did not make it close at all.
Oh, Tennessee choked.
They shut down the Tennessee run game, which I said, if you can shut down the Tennessee run game, Joe Milton will make mistakes, and he did. He threw an interception, he fumbled twice, and one of them was recovered by Missouri. Missouri also had a pick 6 on that interception. Dalen Carnell returning at 38 yards for the score. Cody Schrader in this one putting up 205 yards and a touchdown, cementing his lead in SEC rushing yards this season. And Brady Cook played a good game as well, going 18 of 24 for 275, a touchdown, a pick. So just an all-around great performance from the Tigers this weekend. Great way to bounce back after a very potentially deflating and disappointing Georgia loss. And then they get Florida this week, which should be an easy win for them at home with how bad the Gator defense has been this year. And then they finish the season out with Arkansas. So Missouri should end up going 10-2 this season.
I have to agree. I do think Missouri is a prime example that if you implemented the 12-game playoff right now, this is a team I don't think a lot of teams would want to be versing.
No.
They're coming in extremely hot. I don't even take that Georgia loss to be necessarily disappointing. They really hung in there. A few bad calls, a few mistakes, but they hung in there with Georgia, who right now is 100% the #1 team in the country. So
for sure,
it's great to see Missouri on this up. Unfortunately, they probably won't be rewarded for it, but
yeah, as you mentioned about the 12-team playoff right now, who wouldn't want to see that 8-9 game between Alabama and Missouri right now?
I don't know about that. When we come back, we're breaking down Rivalry Weekend because, folks, we're just 2 weeks away. You're watching Around the SEC. Welcome back to Around the SEC. It's not a secret that Week 13 is home to many intense rivalry games. Many teams across the Southeastern Conference are part of some of the fiercest rivalries, both in and out of conference. So let's break down some of these matchups, look at the storylines, and make some predictions. Of course, Thanksgiving is always served with a side of egg bowl, that is. In-state foes Ole Miss and Mississippi State will face off on Thanksgiving night in Starkville for the Golden Egg. The first meeting was in 1901, and the Rebels lead the series 64-46-6. But the Bulldogs are the reigning champions as they won the game last season in what ended up being the last game for the late great Coach Mike Leach before he passed. Right now, the only storyline is Ole Miss is playing for revenge, while Mississippi State is playing to avoid falling to last place in the SEC West. I do think Ole Miss wins big, but you never know in a rivalry game. What do you think about this matchup?
On paper, Ole Miss should steamroll this Mississippi State team. Mississippi State does not have a defense. Ole Miss has an elite offense. Mississippi State has struggled to move the ball all year, and the Ole Miss defense, I think, will be good enough. But as you said, rivalry games, you never know what's going to happen, so you can't take anything for granted in these, but I still think Ole Miss wins pretty easily.
Which Mississippi State has to upset Ole Miss on Thanksgiving to avoid its worst SEC record, 1-7, since 2006. So I guess you could argue they're playing for more. I think at this point in the season, neither of them is really playing for anything at this point, but you know, people love to brag and win a rivalry game. So we'll see what happens on Thanksgiving.
For sure. Moving on to our first SEC versus ACC rivalry of the week, the defending champion Georgia Bulldogs will travel to Atlanta to take on Georgia Tech in the game they call clean old-fashioned hate. This game might look free for the Dogs on paper, who have a big lead in the series all time, but Tech is no slouch this year, coming in with a very good offense led by Texas A&M transfer Haynes King at quarterback. What do you think about this one?
I think this is an easy one for Georgia, but I did hear from someone who's very high up in the Georgia beat, follows this team. They said this rivalry is not as deep as it was for maybe the older generations, and winning it doesn't mean as much as losing it. Losing it feels 10 times worse for them. If Georgia were to go lose to Georgia Tech, all hell's broken loose, because I don't know what would happen if that were to happen. But you never know. They upset UNC this season. They've hung in there with some bigger name schools.
This Georgia Tech team, I think, is better than they get credit for. Haynes King has played very well for them this season. The defense has been better than most people think based on their record, but I still think they don't quite have enough to beat Georgia. I do think it's a fairly close game being played in Atlanta. I think Georgia Tech will come out ready to go in this one, maybe surprise some people, but I still think Georgia's just too good. The talent gap is too big in this one.
Yeah, I think they steamroll them, unfortunately, but we'll see. Now we look to a rivalry that is typically seen more as a basketball rivalry. However, this game has some depth this year on the football side, and that is Kentucky taking on in-state rivals Louisville as they play for the Governor's Cup. Since the rivalry renewed in 1994, the Wildcats lead the series 19-15. The last time the Cardinals won this game was in 2017, but this year a win for them could mean so much more. Because let me tell you, their playoff hopes right now are far from dead. A win over Miami this weekend, then a win over Kentucky sends them to the ACC Championship with a chance to take down Florida State. Is it possible this is the first time in a while this matchup is relevant?
I think it is, and weirdly, over the last 2 years, you'd have said if there's any team that's going to have high stakes in this game, it would be Kentucky, with how they've had their last few years go, and Louisville's been nowhere. But Jeff Brom has injected life into this Louisville program this season. They've come out of nowhere. They're 9-1. The offense looks really good. The defense is top 15 in the country, so I think the Cardinals get this one done over the Wildcats fairly easily. I don't think Kentucky has the defense or the offensive line to remain in this game, so I think Louisville gets this done and punches their ticket, or their ticket's already punched, but gives them a shot at Florida State with some momentum going in.
I think this Louisville team's extremely hot and is not being talked about simply because it's Louisville, but everyone's just assuming Florida State's going to cruise right through and win the ACC title outright.
Florida State struggled
They've
in Miami
struggled in
and
a
Pitt
lot
the last
of
couple
games. And Louisville looks pretty good. I think they go down to Miami this week. I think they get it done. By no means is that necessarily an easy matchup for them, but if they get that done, can beat Kentucky, I really do think they have a great chance to upset FSU. And then imagine what that would do for the playoff rankings. Can you imagine seeing Louisville up in one of those top spots?
That would be crazy.
That's crazy that a game between Kentucky and Louisville actually means something for once. It's never a game I've
in football as well.
So, hey, basketball, football. You see it happening down here with Auburn, Alabama?
Fortunately for Louisville, because their basketball team is brutally bad this season.
Yeah, unfortunately, they have a rough history.
Yeah. And finally, the Alabama Crimson Tide will travel down to Auburn to take on the Tigers in the Iron Bowl. Alabama leads the series 49-37-1 all time in one of college football's most storied rivalries. Though Auburn aren't exactly world beaters by any means this season, the magic of Jordan-Hare Stadium is always a factor in this one. Do you think the Tigers can pull off the upset this season, or do you think Alabama just gets one more win before they head to Atlanta?
Here's what I'll say about this year's game, and every time this game is played in Auburn, Alabama. The deciding factor of this game will be Jordan-Hare Stadium. It always is. I've seen it. I never believed it until I saw it in person 2 years ago, and we came in with a TJ Finley-led team and still forced them into overtime. So I think the stadium atmosphere is going to be the deciding factor in this game. This is arguably the fiercest rivalry in college football. And it's super passionate. The way this state is, these two schools have been juggernauts in the college football world for so long, and it's so deeply rooted in this state, especially having no professional sports. And so every year I say this, that this is anyone's game, especially here. Also, I think people are overlooking that Jalen Milroe and Peyton Thorne recently, their stats are not super different, and the media is painting Jalen Milroe as a potential Heisman candidate. So I think we can hang in there. They have a great defense. We have a great defense. And so I don't think it's as big as of a talent deficit as the media is making everyone believe. Alabama does lead, and since Nick Saban took over as Alabama's head coach in 2007, he's 11-5 against Auburn, but 4-4 in games in Jordan-Hare. And we've seen some crazy things happen. So I think Auburn can pull up the upset this year's Iron Bowl.
I think Auburn's path to victory in this one is taking advantage of the aggressiveness of the Alabama edge rushers. If you can get Chris Braswell to trigger down, if you can get Dallas Turner to trigger down and get him caught in read option, little zone read action with Jarquez Hunter and Peyton Thorne, that's where Auburn's going to have success in this game. If you try to just run it up the middle every play, the Auburn offensive line has played well in the run game this year, but I think the Alabama defensive line is very good. So you have to get them off their game a little bit, run some counters, run some read option, get their edge rushers not be able to commit to just trigger down every play. And then once you do that, that's when you can open up the play action to hit guys like Javarius Johnson or Rivaldo Fairweather, Jay Fair in the pass game. So this read option, I think, is going to be critical for Auburn's chances to win this game. And then with the crowd behind them as well, this game is anything but guaranteed for the Tide.
That stadium will be shaking. If this is your first Iron Bowl experience, I'm assuming?
Yes.
The stadium will be shaking. We saw what happened when we played Georgia a couple months ago. That stadium was insane. And so I can't only imagine what it's going to be like coming off of 3-game winning streak. Auburn fans seem excited again. And so I think that'll be the biggest factor. And like you said, and Hugh Freeze came out and said, we need to get going almost immediately. You have to come out hot. You can't let it drag. You have to come out playing immediately, getting dynamic immediately. And I think that'll be the best way for them to win this game. And what a way it would be for Hugh Freeze to wrap up his first season. And I really think it would be the most poetic finish. It's been a while since Auburn fans have felt like this about this team. And
what Auburn fan wouldn't have taken 8-4 with an Iron Bowl win at the start of this year?
I didn't believe it. I said we were maybe going 6-6. Honestly, at one point I was saying that. But they've looked really good. If they play like they did on Saturday, I think this is anyone's game. And I think everyone should be super excited to watch this year's Iron Bowl. We'll be back in 2 weeks to recap it. Hopefully, we get to say the Tigers win, and we'll be rolling tumors on 2 weeks from now.
Yes.
So, when we come back, we make game predictions right here on Around the SEC. Welcome back to Around the SEC. Now let's make some game predictions. There's not many. It's a little bit of a boring week.
It's Cupcake Week, guys.
But there's still a few, including one really big matchup that we'll get to at the end. But we start off with the Florida Gators heading up to Missouri as an 11.5-point underdog. I think we know who you're taking in this game, but I'd just like to hear your thoughts and who you're officially taking in this game.
Like we said, guys, it's Cupcake Week. Missouri gets Florida. This Florida defense is horrendous this season. They're allowing 466 yards per game in SEC play this season, and their run defense has been bad. They've allowed the only two of the only three 200-plus yard rushing games in the SEC this year to Jaden Daniels and Ray Davis, and the other guy to get it done was Cody Schrader last week against Tennessee. So I think the Florida defense is going to be in for a rough day versus Schrader. Give me Missouri big.
I think we said this at the beginning of the season that Florida had one of the worst, toughest schedules, especially towards the end, and you're seeing it because they get Missouri right before they get to go take on the Florida State Seminoles. And right now, this Missouri team is extremely hot. I don't see them declining here, especially at home. I think they cruise right past the Gators And I think they bypass this spread, honestly. I don't know
Yes.
about you.
This could be 20 or more.
Oh, exactly. So we are taking the Missouri Tigers this week. Next, we've got an interesting matchup.
Or terrible.
Terrible, because Kentucky's really slipped these last few weeks. I don't know what happened. But Kentucky travels to Columbia, South Carolina to take on the Gamecocks. They come in as a 1.5-point favorite. I don't know about this matchup. This could really go either way, so I'm curious to see who you're taking.
Well, in a game like this where I don't really respect any aspect of either team other than Spencer Rattler and Ray Davis, give me the South Carolina Gamecocks just because they're at home. Williams-Brice is a great underrated environment in the SEC. They're going to be going crazy because I think they know this is one of their few winnable games this year, and they need any momentum they can going into Clemson the week after. So give me South Carolina.
I'm going to have to disagree, and that's because I think South Carolina, their only player is Spencer Rattler. While I think
Give Xavier Legette some credit. Come on.
While I think Kentucky has a few more pieces, they've looked better at the beginning of the season. They need this win. They've looked rough the past few weeks. They've had a couple beatdowns that just didn't look great. And I don't know. We saw Jacksonville State hang in there with the Gamecocks. So I think I'm taking Kentucky this week, but I do not think this is going to be a good game. I think it's going to be an ugly game.
Yeah.
But I kind of like to see the battle of the lesser teams face off. It's always interesting.
Just don't give us 7-3 like Mississippi State, Arkansas. That was bad enough.
We cannot have a repeat of that game. That was absolutely brutal. Next, and probably the biggest game this weekend, SEC Nation traveling up there to Knoxville, and that is Georgia traveling up to Rocky Top as a 10-point favorite. The last time Georgia traveled up to Tennessee, they took them down, and Tennessee's on a 14-game win streak at home. The last team to beat them, we of course know, was Georgia 2 years ago, who then went on to win the national championship. Do you think they come back and snap that win streak yet again?
I think Georgia does do that, and honestly, give me Georgia by more than the spread of 10 points. I think this Georgia run defense is going to shut down the Tennessee run game, and then, as I've said multiple times, once you do that, Joe Milton cannot run this offense by himself, and I think he won't be able to. Tennessee is going to collapse at home, I think, in embarrassing fashion, so give me Georgia.
I'm going to have to agree. I don't think Milton is the future of this program. While he's improved slightly, I don't think it's enough to carry this team. They're going to have to rely on the run defense, but Georgia has way more to play for in this game. They can't really afford to lose their next two games, especially going into the championship, looking to get that playoff spot. They can't afford to lose this game. Tennessee doesn't have much to play for other than spoiling Georgia, which they could. And it always feels good to win at home. That atmosphere in Neyland is absolutely incredible. Unfortunately, I don't think it's enough to shake up the Georgia Bulldogs, and they will come back and snap that win streak. Georgia wins.
Yes.
And that is all we have for you today on Around the SEC. I'm Mikayla Kelly.
And I'm Micah Farmer.
We'll see you next time.